Okay, so the Oldman Watershed Council, for those of you who might not be familiar with us, we are a nonprofit and a charity. And what we do is we work across sectors as a neutral forum for all voices, bringing people together for water security. And we're one of 11 watershed councils across Alberta, and we cover the land in southwest corner of the province, which is all the land that drains into the Oldman River. And these are the four roles of watershed councils under the Government of Alberta's Water for Life strategy that we are a partner of. And this new calculator today is one of the critical education and literacy tools that we're using to help us build support for and investments in nature-based solutions. So I want to start by sharing why OWC wanted to create this tool in the first place and how we're using it to boost our communications and build support for nature-based solutions. Then I'm going to hand things off to our fantastic consulting team who we contracted to build the calculator and oversee the process. So first, Amy with Green Analytics will talk about the scientific method behind the dollar values, and she'll introduce herself then, followed by a demonstration from Associated Engineering. Mackenzie McKay will actually show you how to use the tool. And then we'll have about 20 minutes for questions, and then we'll wrap up at 3 p.m. I also want to thank the funders of this project. So we wouldn't have been able to do it without them. So Alberta government and Cows and Fish funded the development of the calculator itself. And we had two other funders helping now communicate the results with decision makers, and that's Alberta Eco Trust and RBC Foundation. So thank you so much. We also had two individuals donate when they registered for the event. So I want to thank Helen McMenamin for donating. Thanks, Helen, and an anonymous donor. And last but not least, I want to thank all of the individuals and 13 organizations who provided advice and feedback as we developed the calculator. These folks helped us make sure it was practical for all of us to use and are some of the leaders in the sector. We really appreciated your insights, and you definitely helped us make the tool better. Okay, so we really set out to develop this tool because we all know nature and natural infrastructure provides valuable services like water storage, drought mitigation, water and air quality, filtration, recreational opportunities, etc. But we needed a way to very clearly demonstrate to decision makers and investors how these essential services are valuable in tangible dollars, and the cost of replacing them with built infrastructure would be enormous. And so it's important to note that though we're putting a dollar value on services provided by nature, we're not putting a value on nature itself. We strongly believe that nature is priceless, but we do need a way to show the value of the services nature provides. And, you know, if we had to replace that with something like a water treatment plant, it would be cost prohibitive. So in the past, if you wanted to do this type of thing and put a value on ecosystem services, it likely meant you would be pouring through scientific research, trying to figure out a number and hoping that you did it correctly, or you'd have to hire an expert, which might cost money that you might not have. So we developed this tool so that it would be quick and easy for all of us in the sector. And now it will only take minutes to estimate the dollar value of ecosystem services with this new calculator, and we're super excited to show it to you today. So before we get to the demonstration, I just want to quickly profile a couple of ways that we're using it at OWC in order to inspire you for how you might be able to use it in your work. So the first way that we used it was to promote the Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program, or WRRP. So we wanted to show the valuable impact of this provincial grant program in terms of the ecosystem services it has provided over the past 10 years in order to convince the government to keep investing in this program. I'm sure many of you know this program provided funding to many groups, municipalities, First Nations, nonprofits, etc. And it was really all about reducing impacts from flood and drought by restoring ecosystem health and function. And it was really one of the first times there was a strong recognition of the power of natural infrastructure to reduce the impacts of floods and droughts. And the types of projects that this funded was everything from building wetlands to fencing off sensitive stream banks, planting willows, building beaver dam analogs, keeping cattle out of streams, that type of work that we're all familiar with. But what we didn't have a good handle on was the value of those ecosystem services. And so Green Analytics was able to calculate those for us. And then we and many other organizations, we were part of a group that used the results under the banner of a new group, the Alberta Coalition for Watershed Security, which hopefully you've heard of by now, which is led by Alberta Eco Trust, to encourage the government to keep investing in this program because it was set to end this year and is ending this year. So even though it was not renewed, the 10 years that it existed for will leave a legacy of stewardship and has achieved quite impressive results. So the WRP funded over 60 organizations over 10 years, and this many hectares, so almost 6,000 hectares of wetlands, 2,300 hectares of riparian zones, along 320 kilometers of stream. And so using those hectare values, Green Analytics was able to calculate some very impressive numbers. So the government invested 50 million and has seen a 5 times return on that investment. And so the very exciting unveiling of the big number that was calculated was $253 million per year in ecosystem services provided by WRP funded projects. And so this was quite an astounding number, and we were really excited when we saw this because these are benefits that Albertans will benefit from forever, for as long as that land is kept healthy and functional. And I think that's something to really celebrate. So to break that down a little bit and look at the primary goal of WRP, which was flood and drought protection, I think we can definitely say that was achieved when we see, $88 million in direct flood and storm hazard reduction services and water supply services. And secondarily, they also had a goal of protecting biodiversity, habitat, and water quality. And I think it's clear this goal has also been achieved when we see $129 million every year in ecosystem services directly related to habitat and water filtration. So just to wrap up on this one, I think it's pretty clear WRP provided tremendous value to Alberta with a 5 times return on investment and $253 million in ecosystem services every single year for as long as that land remains healthy. And that program had many other benefits like supporting farmers and ranchers. And we were able to use these results in press release, blogs, briefing notes to elected officials, presentations, media interviews, etc., to really promote the WRP. And we encourage you to use the calculator to boost your own communications efforts. The second case study that I want to share is OWC's own land improvement work. So for over 20 years, we have been doing stewardship activities on the land. And so we were able to use the calculator by looking at the land cover types where we've had impact. And so this was just last fiscal year for grasslands, riparian, and wetlands. These were the numbers that we calculated for our last fiscal year. And we're really excited about that because if you add that up, it's about $74 million in ecosystem services each year that we had a direct influence over. And we're really excited now to go back over the past 20 years that we've been doing this work and calculate our contribution to ecosystem services over those 20 years. And I anticipate that number will be in the hundreds of millions of dollars because we've done over 150 stewardship projects so far in those 20 years. And we're using that information to communicate to decision makers and investors that land stewardship initiatives have a clear return on investment. We hope that by sharing these estimated dollar values, which are very conservative estimates, that governments and funders will have the justification they need to invest in natural infrastructure. And we're just getting started on this. This is new information. So we're really excited to see how this grows over time and hearing stories from all of you of how you're using the calculator and how it's helping you. So I want to take a little break while we get set up for the next part. We'll do a quick poll. Erin, if you could please share that. I'd like to hear from you guys. So I'll just give everyone a minute to please complete the poll. And then we'll check out the results. Oh, they're coming in live, even better. Yeah, so we're interested in seeing what sector people are from and how they think they might use the calculator. So when you go to use the actual calculator, and I know many people have because we've had over 200 visits to the website in the last few weeks, please complete the survey on the bottom right. It should pop up after 5 minutes. And if you could please complete that survey or press give feedback on the bottom right, we'd really appreciate it. All right, looks like things are slowing down. So let's share the results now, Erin. Okay, so nonprofit organizations are about 42%, provincial government 20%, municipal government 25%, a few ag producers and First Nations. Great, well, thank you so much for joining us. And then how will you use the results? So education, 63%, reporting, 40%, advocacy, 37%, fundraising, 29%, other, 29%. Oh, I'm curious what the other is. Well, look forward to hearing about that. And then, will this tool be valuable to you? Not valuable, 0. Oh, thank goodness. So yeah, it looks like people are excited about it as well. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing that and get rid of that. And yeah, I just want to thank the funders again one last time as I hand things over to Amy. She's going to share the science behind the calculator, and then we'll have Mackenzie do a demonstration, and then we'll have questions.
Great. Thanks, Shannon. Oh, if you can keep sharing that deck, you can just keep
Right.
slide forward and my slides are right there. Yeah, should be
Perfect.
good. Okay. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Amy Taylor. I'm the CEO with Green Analytics. I'm based in Canmore, Alberta, and I'm joined today by my colleagues, Jeff Wilson, who's a senior economist with Green Analytics, and Mackenzie from Associated Engineers. She will be doing the demo, as Shannon mentioned. So if you can go to the next slide. What I'll be speaking to is the overall approach we use to develop the calculator, as well as how we derived the values that are embedded within it. So the overarching approach to developing the calculator is based on what is called benefits transfer. I'll elaborate on this on the next slide, but briefly, benefits transfer involves applying existing ecosystem service values that are derived from the valuation literature to the project under consideration. And as we were identifying the values from the literature that we wanted to employ in the calculator, our focus was on identifying dollar per hectare values and specifically dollar per hectare values for land cover and ecosystem combinations. A key objective in developing the calculator was for it to be user-friendly. So by focusing on benefits transfer and those dollar per hectare values, the calculator at the end of the day only requires that users identify the relevant services and the respective land cover areas associated with their project in order to derive ecosystem service values for their project. So why we took this approach? Well, benefits transfer is a well-recognized and accepted approach for establishing ecosystem services. The values that we employed, which I will speak further to in a couple of slides, are grounded in the peer-reviewed literature, and the approach is transparent and can be improved upon over time. If you can go to the next slide. So what is benefits transfer? Benefits transfer applies economic values from an existing study to a new policy site with similar ecological and socioeconomic considerations. So there's 4 steps involved. The first one is to define that policy site. So define the project under consideration. Step 2, select the existing studies that you want to apply to that policy site. Step 3, transfer those existing study values to the policy site. And 4, report on the results. So essentially, in the case of the calculator, we've taken care of steps 2 and 3 for you. We have selected the study site data or values that will be applied to your policy site. And in using the calculator, those values are automatically transferred to your project area. So why use benefits transfer? Well, as I mentioned, it is widely accepted and recognized as a valuation approach for ecosystem services. It's cost effective relative to primary evaluation, where we may have to go to a study site and collect data. And for the same reason, it's much quicker than primary evaluation studies. And it is considered appropriate for regional planning and screening level analyses, which the focus and intended use of the ecosystem service calculator that we created for the Oldman Watershed. If you go to the next site or the next slide. The thing with benefits transfer, though, is it is only as strong as the weakest value estimate that's included in it, of course, right? When we're transferring values from the literature to our site, we want the site in the literature and our study site to be as similar as possible. So in developing the calculator, we did take significant time to identify the most appropriate studies to apply within the calculator, recognizing that ultimately they would be applied to the Alberta context. We began by developing an extensive ecosystem service valuation database that contained almost $2,000 per hectare values across different ecosystem service and land cover combinations. We then filtered that large database to a subset of values that we deemed most appropriate for the Alberta context and for employing in the calculator. We chose studies with, to the greatest extent possible, similar ecological and socioeconomic conditions. Ultimately, we selected 421 studies or values to establish average values per hectare for different ecosystem service and land cover combinations. Those are the average values that are embedded into the calculator. And I think it's worth noting that we did include 89 studies from Alberta, BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. And of those, 78 are actually Alberta-specific values that are employed in the calculator. If we can go to the next slide, please. So this slide shows you the range of service and land cover combinations that have values in the calculator. So anywhere you see an intersection with an ecosystem service and a land cover, those were the values that we were obtaining from the literature. So the range of ecosystem services include air filtration, global climate regulation, soil and sediment regulation, water purification, water flow regulation, flood control, nursery population and habitat maintenance, visual amenity, recreation and water supply. And the land covers that we were looking at include forests, wetland, grasslands, open water, riparian areas, and shrublands. So those 421 values that we deemed appropriate for application to the Alberta context were used to derive the average values per hectare that you see here by forest and ecosystem service type. You will notice that in some cases it says insufficient data. That was where we looked at the literature and we did not find numbers that we felt could be applied to the Alberta context. So those are currently gaps in the calculator, something that we can revisit it over time as the evaluation work advances in the province and surrounding area. And then you'll notice under the riparian column, there are a number of services where we have a evaluation estimate. And then there are 3 services where it says weighted average. I'll elaborate on that in the next slide, but those are cases where, again, there were not riparian specific values available in the literature, but recognizing the important role that riparian areas play across these various services, we came up with a different approach to address those gaps. So if you go to the next slide, then ultimately, the calculator estimates ecosystem service benefits based on user-entered land cover areas, so entering hectares or square kilometers for your particular project across different land cover types, including forests, wetlands, grasslands, shrublands, and open water. And then as for the riparian areas, you'll recall from the previous slide, a number of services did have riparian specific values. For the services where we didn't have riparian specific values, users enter the land cover types that are associated with the riparian area under question. So if your riparian area is comprised of a bit of forest, a bit of wetland, and a bit of grassland, you put the respective areas for those particular land cover types within the riparian area into the calculator, and you'll be able to derive service values for those other services. Once the land cover areas are entered, the calculator estimates the annual value of ecosystem service, both by service and by land cover type. So on the right side of this slide, you can see some sample outputs. The top one showing service values by land cover type. And in this particular example, it's broken down across forest, wetland, grassland, open water, and shrubland. Mackenzie will show you the full range of land cover types that can be captured there. And then in the bottom graph, you see the breakdown of the ecosystem service values by service: air filtration, global climate regulation, soil and sediment regulation, etc. If we go to the next slide, the calculator also has the option of estimating the value of volunteerism and education benefits. So when it comes to volunteerism, users can input the total hours associated with their project, and the calculator applies then an hourly rate, dollar per hour, to estimate the economic contribution of that volunteerism. And the same for education. If users know the number of hours that were associated with workshops, outreach, other education programming, those hours can be entered, and a dollar per hour will be assigned to estimate the economic contribution of those economic opportunities. Those are optional features within the calculator, as is the next feature on the next slide, which is to enter the cost of the project. If users do know the cost of the project, they can enter that, and the calculator will compare the cost with the sum of the service benefits derived from that particular project. And in this way, they can calculate a social return on investment, or SROI. A positive SROI means that the benefits exceeded the costs, and a negative means that the benefits did not exceed the cost. If we go one more slide, just want to highlight a few limitations of the calculator before we transition into our demo. So first of all, the estimates are not location specific. Values represent, as I've stated, they're derived from the literature and they're averages. So they are intended to be indicative rather than site specific. They are based on the available research. We drew, as I mentioned, on 421 different values to establish the average values for Alberta. A number of those, as I noted, are Alberta specific. But of course, for some land cover and ecosystem service combinations, we will have more or less values to draw on. So there is a margin of error there. Over time, as the studies for Alberta become more robust, we can strengthen that and have it be more Alberta specific. The ecological condition assumptions embedded in the calculator are essentially that the ecosystems we are talking about are healthy. So if your project was recently restored and has not come to maturity, the estimates that you'll be driving through the calculator represent what that project will look like once it has established and matured, as opposed to immediately following restoration. Number four, of course, we didn't include all ecosystem service value. They're not monetized, and in some cases, it would be inappropriate to do so. We have monetized a range of services, which we're comfortable with. But in this way, it is a conservative estimate because it is not comprehensive. And then finally, the values are intended for high-level decision support. They are not considered site-specific analyses. So they should be used for planning, communication, and project comparison, as as we've talked about, and as the examples that Shannon has presented are aligned with. Okay, that's my overview. If you go one more slide, that's our cue to switch over to Mackenzie, who can take it from there in terms of demoing the tool.
Great, thanks, Amy. So I'm going to share my screen here. Can everyone see the OWC homepage? Looks good? Okay. So I just wanted to get everyone oriented with how to find the calculator in the first place. So if you're on the OWC homepage, it's right now saved under the action header. So just scroll down there and click on Ecosystem Services Calculator. That's going to pull you up to a landing page, which has a lot of great information and context. I'm not going to go through everything in depth today because I want to get into the calculator, which I know everyone's excited to see. But just so everyone's aware, this landing page does have an introduction about why the calculator was developed, what went into it, funder acknowledgement, and some links to additional resources if you're curious. So I'd encourage everyone to tinker around here, but this does have drop-down sections to learn more about who this calculator is appropriate for, definitions of those services, how to interpret the results, as well as those limitations of the calculator. So we want to make sure everyone's aware of what the limitations are, what this is useful for, and maybe what it's useful for. So this landing page does have the launch button at both the top and the bottom, so you can get to the calculator when you need to. I do just want to also acknowledge this feedback survey call out here. So as Shannon mentioned, this will automatically pop up on your screen after a few minutes. But if you did want to just immediately click on it, you are able to provide feedback. And that is really, really helpful for the OWC, as well as for us as folks who work in this space to understand what your needs are, what you're liking, and what could be improved. All right, so let's click Launch Calculator. So this will pull up a new web page here, where at the top, we have some additional links to that instructions landing page. We also have an additional data source document. So we know many folks are curious, what is that literature that Amy's talking about? What are those citations? So if you click that button, it's an additional report to provide more information on the data that's being fed into this calculator. So as you're having conversations with decision makers or using this in different ways, you may be curious to click on that document. We also do have another reminder here that it's always good to check out the limitations of the calculator before you go and use this in different ways, just so you're using it appropriately. So that is linked there as well. And one other thing to draw your attention to is these little eye circle icons. So as you hover over those eyes throughout the calculator, it has information, descriptions, definitions throughout. That way, all the information you need is in one place. So we're trying to keep it as user-friendly as possible. So I do have a couple examples that I wanted to work through with everyone today, but just to kind of show you how these pieces hang together. The first step is asking about riparian area. So this is a step. If you've got riparian, you need to do something here. If you don't have riparian in your project or your study area, you can just disregard that one. and proceed directly to step 2. As Amy mentioned, this tool is based on land cover area. So you can select hectares, square kilometers, or acres, depending on what your preference is. And you'll be asked to input those areas here to help with this valuation. After you insert areas, you can then select the different services you're interested in seeing values for. And then this will automatically populate those results. So I wanted to work through 2 quick examples just so people can see how this is used in different contexts in different ways. So our first example is more of an urban area. This has riparian in it. It also has some population close by. Our second example is a rural example. It's got some wetlands, not as much population density, but these are similar area sizes, but just different land cover types. So we're going to start off with the urban example. So I'm back on the calculator. And as I mentioned, my urban example does have riparian in it. I've got 15 hectares of riparian area in this hypothetical example. Because I've inserted a value in this box, it does prompt me to insert the type of riparian vegetation cover. And as Amy mentioned, this is going to allow us to actually get values for these areas. So in my example, this riparian area is made up of 80% of forest and 20% of shrubland. So once I've entered those and this totals to 100%, I no longer have that red text telling me to insert information here. I know I've got everything covered. I then proceed to step 2, which asks me to add the rest of the areas and the land cover types to make up the total. So I've already covered riparian. I'm not going to double count riparian. I'm going to focus on the non-riparian areas. So I have 75 hectares of forest, 200 hectares of grassland, 15 of open water, and 55 of shrubland. So in this example, I don't have any wetlands, so I'm just leaving it blank. I don't need to do anything with that. I scroll down and I see the calculator has automatically selected all of the services for me. So that's really handy. I don't have to go through and click everything. However, if I was interested in toggling things off and on, I can click clear all and it removes all the selections, or I can select all. I can also toggle things on and off just like this if I do want to get more granular for specific services and specific land cover areas. So the tool's done all the work for me. It selected all of this different services, so I don't have to do anything there. Steps 4 and 5 are these optional steps that Amy also spoke about. So for the sake of this project, I don't have any volunteer education components. I'm really just curious in what the value of that area is of those services. So I'm not going to do anything with step 4 and 5 for this example. Based on the selections, I can see that this value summary has already done all the work for me. So I can see annually how much of these different ecosystem services, how much value is being provided by each of the different land cover types. And as Shannon mentioned, that great survey will automatically pop up. So I'm reminded to provide my feedback. So you can just scroll through those questions, click done. If you're not ready to do it yet, you just exit it out and then you can access it there on the right. So I can see this value summary, which is great. Some folks do like to tinker a bit more. So you are able to click download and actually get a spreadsheet of all those values if you want to play with that in different ways and dig into that more. And these graphs here, these do just automatically generate based on the selections. And importantly, at the top, this is the one that tells you that total annual value. So that's just right at the top there. It's hard to miss. Right now, the best way to get these graphs sort of out of the tool is just to take a quick screen snip. But again, because you're able to download those values in a spreadsheet, you are welcome to do that and create additional graphics if you wanted to do so. So that's my urban example. I am going to do my rural example with wetlands. So I'm just going to click reset all selections. That deletes everything for me, so I don't have to worry about that. And I'm going to proceed with my rural example. So this one is also in hectares. In this case, I have 100 hectares of forest, 20 of wetlands, and 220 of grassland. I don't have any riparian in this example, so I'm leaving that blank, and I'm not getting any error messages, so everything's good. I am going to scroll down and see the services that are toggled on. I see it, some of them aren't toggled on, so I'm just going to click select all because I do want to see everything in the total value that's provided. However, as you'll remember, this is a more rural area. I don't anticipate a ton of recreation and sort of human-oriented interactions with the site. So I'm actually going to just remove those services from this example and just make sure I've got water supply toggled on properly. So the big thing with the calculator is just making sure you've got the right things selected where you want them. In this case, though, there are wetlands, and I'm hoping to do a wetland restoration project. So I'm going to click on 4, and I'm going to allocate 120 volunteer hours for this project, and it's going to generate a value for that. And I'm going to assign $15 an hour as kind of the hourly rate for that work. You're welcome to play around with that and insert the value that works best for you. I am also going to specify the investment cost. And I believe about 150,000 per hectare is what we were going to use for this example. So because I have 20 hectares, I'm going to input 3 million. Make sure I have all of my zeros here. So, all right. So I see at the bottom here, the summary is populating properly. I can see the different service value for the different land cover types and services. I do see I've got my graphs all updating here, and I can see that I've got the social return on investment. So because this is above 0, I know that this is a strong return on investment for this work. So to kind of summarize those two examples here, because I didn't do those optional steps 4 and 5 with my urban example, I've got my annual service value, and I've got a couple graphs to support that work. With rural, because I did insert some volunteer hours, I've got a value calculated for that. And I've also got that really handy ROI value there too. So nearly $30 additional annual service value for every dollar we invest in that wetland restoration. So that's a really handy value to go out and do some advocacy work with. So I think with that, those are the main bits of the calculator. And I think we can answer any questions that folks have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy and Mackenzie. I really appreciate that. Yeah, we have time for questions. And Lori put one in the chat already, so we'll start there. She would like to know how often the calculator will need to be updated to keep the economics current.
Yeah, Jeff and I can take that one. I mean, it's not a high-speed train, this area of research. So, I would say every few, 2 to 3 years, we should probably be checking the database against anything that's new. The reality is that Green Analytics follows that literature very closely, so we can also be flagging things as they come up. They're probably not going to get past us for 2 to 3 years, but I would say that's probably a reasonable rule of thumb. Jeff?
Yeah, I would just add too that like a simple like cost of living inflation updates can be applied to these to make sure that even though, even if the fundamental data underneath isn't changing, the value is reflective of the current market situation.
Good point.
And that's an easy annual update that can be done.
Great, thank you. So folks, if you have a question, you can press react and raise your hand, or just unmute and ask your question, or put it in the chat, whatever works. I did want to bring one thing up that I'd like Amy and Jeff to speak to is what other services are missing that we might be able to add in the future to have a more robust number of services.
Mhm. I would say the provisioning services is probably a fairly obvious gap. That's, the goods that more so than the services that are derived from the area. So that's something that we could think about adding in the future. Is there anything else on your radar, Jeff, in terms of service or goods gaps?
That's good. I mean, I think we've got a pretty good coverage there. We're definitely capturing the major ones, particularly on the regulating side. There could be some other cultural angles that could be factored in, but yeah, I don't nothing off the top of my head specifically.
Yeah, because two that we had identified as a committee was the food provisioning service and timber provisioning service that we weren't able to include at this point, but that are very important in Alberta. We do grow a lot of food and harvest a lot of timber. So could you just comment on, what needs to be done to get the data up to snuff so we could include those?
Yeah, so that would be um it's a little that one those are a bit trickier because it's a little harder to break those down onto a per hectare basis. But there's some work that could be done around um, rates of available timber supply. Like taking the existing crop data, for instance, like if we understand what crops are where. There's standard economic valuation approaches for both those are economic goods, they're market goods, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So there is values there for them that can be relied on. So it just becomes more of a sort of a data management process and making sure that that information is updated with the new crops every year, the new or crop rotations, the available timber supply in certain areas and how that's changing.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. That's really helpful. And maybe that's something else that we could just touch on, because I'm not seeing any other questions, is the location piece and how some of these services are very location specific, and over time, hopefully we could ask um to add location where we have detailed land cover. Would you be able to
Yeah,
comment?
absolutely. I mean, it would be really neat to have a tool where you could actually go to a map and draw a circle, right? And say that's my study area. And then the different land cover types would be automatically calculated. And, then it would be easier to make that direct connection between the land cover and the service provision, as right now the user needs to know, what services are relevant to my project and make sure that they align. So, that's the kind of functionality we could think about down the road where you can actually upload a map with a boundary. And then the area calculations would be done as part of the calculator as opposed to user input.
Great, thank you. And Deborah has a question. She would like to know, based on the examples, were the areas of riparian and shrubland estimated using a mapping software?
That's a good question. Those examples were purely for illustrative purposes. So I did some Google Maps kind of measurements there just to kind of get rough estimates. But absolutely, if you were doing this, you'd want to be more granular than kind of just eyeballing it like me. The purpose of those examples was really to show you different ways of using the tool.
But certainly you could use GIS if you know your project area and to delineate the different land cover types within your project area and quantify those, and those would become the inputs that you'd put into the calculator.
Great, thank you. Any other questions? Lori?
Thanks for developing this tool. It's amazing, and all your expertise and the hard work that's gone into it. I think it's going to be really, really valuable for many organizations to be able to do these calculations. My question is around, so does it matter if you're restoring a site and so the land potentially is degraded, so you would put in your measurements around your site boundary? Or should we be thinking about like intact landscapes, or can it do both? I guess I'm just trying to understand like the different types of use cases to use the calculator, and how or if it adjusts for those because there is no like sort of like intervention piece as part of the calculator, right? It's making an assumption about something.
Yeah. Yeah. So it gives you the ladder. It tells you the potential of that project when it's healthy and established. So again, possibly a future functionality we could think about where a user could specify, oh, this is an area that's just been restored. So account for the time that it takes for establishment. Otherwise, I mean, you can use it in a restoration context, but your messaging has to be, this is what will be provided by this project once it is established and mature.
And similarly, I think we all need to be careful to use words like estimate and, land influenced by. We aren't necessarily going to be able to say this exact spot because we don't have location specifics. They're averages. So that's a good point. Thank you. Rajiv had a question, and then we'll get to Rick. So he says, recognizing this is very early on, has the tool been used for advocacy or decision making yet? And yes, we have been using it to advocate for the renewal of the Watershed Resiliency and Restoration Program funding. As I mentioned, that was not successful. The program was not renewed, but we were able to show that over the 10 years that it existed, it had a strong return on investment and is really leaving a really positive legacy of stewardship for Alberta, and helps us to build a case for renewed investments in similar programs. It's not going to be that exact one, but we're still hoping to push for similar programs to be developed that really focus on funding restoration activities specifically. So thanks for your question. Rick, go ahead.
Yeah, on a more broader question, is there any potential for this kind of a tool to be used, say, by a project proponent who has an obvious or has a land impact and could use this to propose some kind of an offset for the impacts that they have? Now that's outside of OWSC's application, but might be used by a project proponent or even a regulator.
Yeah, so for example, if you use the tool on your land to say, we had 100 acres of intact grassland, you know the value, and then you could say, well, now those 100 acres have been damaged in some way, and we're no longer seeing those ecosystem service values because they've been taken away. So I mean, you could use it in that way again, and you just have to be careful to say.
I guess my question is there any, well, I mean, it's more generally to the consultants. Is there any interest more broadly, in the private sector of using a tool like this to say justify the use of a landscape by providing offsets, in some creditable way?
Yeah, so really interesting question. I mean, I think you could certainly use the tool to help have that conversation. Fundamentally, when we're talking about offsets, that would come down to probably like what the value of that offset would actually be, like what, say the private sector might be willing to pay to manage a particular area for, let's say, maintaining water quality because they rely on clean water, so they want to make sure the areas in the watershed, they would probably negotiate what that value would be through the an offset negotiation process. That would come with contractual agreements and all that sort of thing. So what the actual fee or amount of money that could be exchanged, I would say wouldn't necessarily be driven by what's in the calculator entirely, but I think you could certainly use that to help have that conversation and be part of that negotiation process.
Yeah, a proponent's objective would be obviously to justify a development that is under scrutiny for an impact, and to avoid any of the obvious ones in this area, or perhaps obvious one, but maybe neutral, say a solar development, impact on grasslands. I have no idea what that might be, but is there an offset by restoring grasslands?
Yeah, definitely, good, possibilities there for sure, and I mean, the tool would give you a sense of, the potential benefits that could be
Yeah,
generated from those offsets. But again, that's kind of getting down to those more site specific, you know, you know, we need to
does it?
restore that, and it would have to get a bit more precise. But you could definitely use the tool as a way to kind of get a sense of what the orders of magnitude likely are.
It's a high-level screening tool
Yeah.
essentially at this point, but where public policy makers are having a debate about, say, solar development, that seems to have been terminated in Alberta, but on a broader, in principle, might be something that would come up in the future.
Absolutely.
Anyway, thanks for the observation.
Yeah, the thing I would add to that would be it's in some ways it's a counter to the current assumption from the developer's perspective that is perhaps that the service value is zero, right? And we know that it's not zero when we
Exactly.
develop land. And so this makes it explicit. We don't know exactly what it is at this particular site, but we know it's not zero. And here's a number that we can start, have to start the conversation and acknowledge the fact that it's the assumption that it's zero is inaccurate.
Yeah, great point. Thanks, Amy. We have another question on the chat. Vanessa would like to ask about because it's designed primarily for regional scale planning rather than evaluating individuals' project sites, is there a minimum area threshold?
We didn't have that explicitly in mind when we built the tool. It's more about the user knowing the land that the project that they're thinking of and entering into the calculator, and then by association knowing what services are going to take place there. So, a little, a wetland with no access to recreation, don't pick the recreation button. So it's more about the user just knowing a bit as opposed to a specific minimum threshold for land.
Thanks, Amy. And last question from Lori. She's asking if the tool could support the Ecosystem Services Grant Program. And that's a good point. It's actually one of the reasons why we did this was because we were speaking with some of our government partners and they mentioned this new grant program and, how do you figure out how much annual payments to landowners can be? And this is one way to start that conversation and say, well, these are the values. How much can we actually afford to pay landowners for ecosystem service payments? Typically, what we can afford is much less than the value, and again, isn't site specific. So it gets complicated, but yes, that it is intended to help work towards that type of payment. Great, so we're at 3 o'clock, so we're going to wrap up. I just want to share the URL with you. So save this on in your browser. It's oldmanwatershed.ca/eco-kelp. That's what you can use. Please stay in touch with us. That QR code, you'll be able to sign up for a free membership. And we just want to say thanks again to everyone for joining us, to our funders and partners. And we hope that the calculator will be really useful to you. And we are really excited to hear from you, how you're using it and what you're finding useful. So please complete the survey and get in touch and let us know. So thank you and have a great day. Bye, Rick. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Shannon. We'll be in touch. Bye
Sounds
for now.
great.
Bye, Mackenzie.
So take care. Bye.
Bye, everyone.